April 27, 1945. Soviet heavy artillery strikes land just miles from the Ravensbrück camp perimeter, shaking the ground beneath the leather boots of the female guards. The deep vibration from the approaching Red Army reverberates directly in their chests, triggering a sudden panic that breaks 6 years of impunity. These young women wear crisp uniforms and carry heavy batons, holding the power of life and death over 45,000 prisoners. For over 2,000 days, they beat inmates to death and starved entire barracks without ever facing a legal consequence. Now, the hunters realize they are becoming the prey. In exactly 72 hours, every single consequence of their daily crimes will finally catch up to them. Some abandon their guard posts immediately, while others attempt to burn the evidence in the courtyards. This is the story of their cowardice. 6 years of unchecked impunity did not begin with hardened killers. The cruelest camp staff actually consisted of teenagers and farm girls responding to a job listing. In 1939, ordinary German newspapers ran simple vacancies. The fresh morning paper rustled on kitchen tables. The advertisement promised good pay and a free uniform. It required no prior experience. This ordinary entry-level position offered an immediate jump to total power over other human beings. Girls packed small bags in quiet provincial towns. They traveled to a compound hidden deep in the pine forests 60 miles north of Berlin. The new recruits stripped off their civilian dresses and buttoned up the SS uniform. 3,500 women eventually entered the Nazi camp system. Hundreds ended up stationed specifically in Ravensbrück. That total number of female guards exceeded the entire population of many farming villages they originally left behind. The state recruitment process specifically targeted factory workers and teenagers. Many arrived nervous and unaccustomed to violence. The camp command structure quickly replaced their civilian uncertainty with unchecked authority. Cruelty earned immediate rewards. Hesitation brought swift punishment. Older guards demonstrated exactly how to use a wooden baton. Striking a prisoner became a standard daily routine to secure a higher rank. Most crossed the point of no return within a few weeks. Within a few weeks, the recruits who answered simple newspaper ads transformed into architects of total erasure. By 1944, Ravensbrück held women from Poland, the Netherlands, France, and Yugoslavia. The geography of the arriving train cars spanned from the French coast to the deep Soviet territories. It encompassed millions of square kilometers of occupied Europe. The new guards supervised the intake process with clinical detachment. They ordered the new arrivals to strip. They shaved their heads down to the scalp. They replaced every single name with a small, stitched piece of fabric carrying a number. The name was always the first thing the camp took away. A number eliminated the individual entirely. The female guards enforced this structural cruelty through every interaction. They looked right through the prisoners. They hit them simply for looking back. This psychological stripping prepared the captive women for the next fate. Prisoners marched daily into the weapons plants. They sat for hours inside the camp's sprawling sewing workshops. There, they stitched military uniforms for the very army that kept them captive behind barbed wire. The manual labor drained their physical strength. Those who slowed down faced immediate disciplinary reports. Those reported went straight to the punishment block. It operated as a calculated cycle of severe exhaustion and strict penalty. The young guards built this exact routine to break any remaining will to live. They forced the prisoners outside for roll call at exactly 4 in the morning. The biting winter wind swept across the open concrete yards. The female guards stood firmly on the parade ground and controlled the silent formations in sub-zero temperatures. Behind the frozen ranks on the parade ground, specific wardens carved out distinct spaces for their own individual sadism. 19-year-old Dorothea Binz walked through the camp almost cheerfully, scanning the rows to choose a victim for her dog. She arrived at the facility at 19, the exact age of a modern university freshman. Survivors watched her move with a light, almost playful stride across the gravel. Suddenly, she unclipped the leash and let the animal tear into an unmoving prisoner. Afterward, the yard echoed with the sharp snap of leather as she calmly pulled her gloves back over her hands. Other guards matched this casual cruelty across the complex, which processed over 130,000 women. Ruth Neudeck managed the punishment block with a severity that unsettled even veteran SS colleagues. Vera Salvaquart administered lethal injections with the focused detachment of someone completing daily paperwork. These women adapted quickly to the camp, which sat just 90 kilometers north of Berlin. They controlled food distributions, water access, and execution schedules without showing any visible psychological strain. In the evening, they sat down and wrote letters home after walking directly past the operational gas chamber. Tens of thousands of exhausted women staggered onto the dirt roads of a dying Germany under armed escort. That evening routine of letters and casual murder did not break when the gates of Ravensbrück finally opened for evacuation. The march began on April 27, 1945. This was exactly 3 days before Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Berlin bunker. The Red Army was already fighting block by block through the capital, just 50 miles to the south. The heavy iron gates swung outward. The columns stretched for miles into the dense pine forests of northern Germany. The female guards walked alongside them, still in uniform, still armed. The thin cotton stripes of the camp uniforms offered zero protection against the damp chill of the spring woods. The temperature hovered barely above freezing. Women who had survived years of starvation now had to walk through a landscape that promised nothing. Civilian refugees clogged the parallel routes. They pushed wooden carts past burned-out trucks and abandoned military gear. The sound of Soviet artillery echoed constantly from the east. It was no longer a distant rumble. It was a physical vibration. The guards knew the war was lost. Every corpse left in a ditch added another piece of evidence for the coming trials. But the executions never paused. A prisoner stumbled over an exposed route. She fell behind the formation. A female guard stepped off the path, raised her pistol, and fired. No hesitation. Another woman stopped to help a collapsed friend. A shot rang out again. The violence possessed a terrifying inertia. They shot stragglers from deeply ingrained habit. They shot them out of fear of their own commanding officers, who remained armed and watchful. They shot them because abandoning their authority felt like erasing their own identities. The killing did not slow down. The executions continued right up to the 30th of April, stopping only when pulling the trigger became physically impossible. April 30th, 1945. Even as April bled away, the habit of killing did not break. Why did these women not desert before the 27th of April? They genuinely believed the crumbling Reich would miraculously hold. The reason they marched on, rather than scattering into the woods, lay in a blinding denial of reality. Soviet artillery thundered just behind their wooden barracks, yet the guards clung to the illusion of victory. 6 years of impunity had erased their instinct for self-preservation. Over 130,000 prisoners passed through those gates. Tens of thousands of surviving witnesses meant their faces were permanently burned into countless mental lists. They could run, but they could never hide. The cognitive dissonance held firm. The women stayed in uniform and awaited instructions. On the 27th of April, command ordered them to abandon the camp. Soviet veterans of the Eastern Front stepped onto the roads and saw SS personnel attempting to dissolve into columns of dying women. The persistent illusions of a rescue finally collapsed on the 30th of April, 1945, beneath the tracks of advancing Soviet tanks. These soldiers had already marched thousands of kilometers from Stalingrad into Germany. Still, the sight on the dirt road forced them to halt. Female guards tore off their gray uniforms and discarded the physical proof of their former authority. They pulled on civilian clothes and shoved themselves directly into the masses of exhausted prisoners they had starved for years. The physical contrast exposed their cowardice instantly. Well-fed faces and sturdy bodies stood out against the emaciated frames of the women they tried to use as shields. The guards hoped to simply disappear into the aftermath and eventually escape toward Hamburg. They believed that removing the uniform would erase their identity entirely. But the surviving prisoners had spent years memorizing the specific gait and the subtle facial features of every woman who held power over them. Civilian clothes offered no protection against that ingrained memory. The starving women turned around in the dust. They raised their hands and started pointing their fingers at them. Those identified on the dusty road soon stood before a British military tribunal. Between 1946 and 1948, these courts handed down 11 death sentences to female guards. The trials took place inside the Curio House in Hamburg. The cold, wood-paneled courtroom felt entirely disconnected from the documented atrocities. British officers in crisp uniforms shuffled paperwork across heavy oak desks. 16 women faced the judges during these initial proceedings. This number represented less than 0.5% of the 3,500 female guards who operated within the camp network. The widespread myth of inherent female gentleness shattered immediately. It collapsed the moment the very first survivor walked up to the wooden stand and began to speak. Emaciated witnesses detailed the daily routine of Ravensbrück with chilling, unedited precision. They described Dorothea Binns striding casually through the housing blocks. She smiled at the prisoners right before the violent beatings began. Survivor after survivor took the oath. They outlined the lethal medical experiments. They recounted the daily selections for the transport trains. They testified under oath about the camp gas chamber. The court stenographers recorded every single word. The voices silenced for 6 long years finally echoed across a public room. The verdicts arrived without delay. 11 women were condemned to hang by the neck. On May 2, 1947, Dorothea Binns stepped out of her holding cell at Hameln Prison. She was only 26 years old. She kept her back perfectly straight. She walked the final steps toward the wooden gallows without showing any visible remorse. Carmen Mori faced the exact same sentence. She simply chose a different exit. She took her own life in her locked cell the night before the scheduled execution. Ruth Nudek hanged. Vera Salvacourt hanged. The famous British executioner Albert Pierpoint carried out the sentences precisely on schedule. Other female guards received varying prison terms for their documented crimes. Some individuals actually completed their full sentences behind thick prison walls. But the post-war political climate shifted rapidly. The public appetite for continuous prosecution faded away. A significant portion of the convicted guards walked free long before their terms expired, securing early release as the newly divided Germany focused on rapid rebuilding. 11 hangings in Hamburg could not answer for hundreds of other guards. Hundreds of women dissolved into new cities after the war. Today, only grass and water remain at their former post. They simply walked away. They changed their names. They married. These women built quiet, long lives in a recovering Germany. Nobody recognized them. Nobody held them accountable. Now, the Ravensbrück Memorial covers the exact same ground. The original wooden barracks disappeared. Sunlight reflects in the lake right beside the overgrown roll call square. Nature erased the physical evidence. Witness testimonies remain the only trace of their crimes. 90,000 women and children passed through the gates of Ravensbrück. That number equals the population of a modern European city. And these prisoners leave a final question for the guards who evaded justice. The survivor testimonies dismantle the convenient myth of born monsters. The camp administration did not recruit sadistic aberrations from the fringes of society. They took ordinary women from quiet hometowns and placed them inside a precise psychological mechanism. The process required 3 steps. The authorities stripped the prisoners of their humanity, consistently rewarded the guards for cruelty, and erased any personal accountability for the violence. When an individual is surrounded by peers committing the exact same acts, the violence quickly becomes a standard daily routine. Ravensbrück proved that ordinary conditions, applied with sufficient consistency, create executioners out of average citizens. The mass murders took place in an ordinary forest just a short distance from the capital. These overseers were not mythical creatures driven by some innate evil, but people who actively embraced their authority. Ordinary women woke up, put on their gray uniforms, and made the conscious choice to kill every single morning.